Chapter 5 Back for Bad. When we were finally back in New York to visit Mum and the other relatives during that summer break, I decided I wanted to stay. I realized that this is what family was supposed to be like. Looking back, I'm glad I had that experience living with my father in California. He went from being an overbearing, scary dad when he was living with Mum to a guy whom I finally got to understand and ultimately like. Living in California with my dad was a divine intervention, and it definitely helped shape a big part of who I am today. So I went from the laid-back West Coast vibe to a very structured high school in New York that had bigger expectations. I was supposed to be in certain places to achieve more academically, and I started out the year saying, I'm going to crush this. Then by the second week I was like, I hope summer school has air conditioning. I realized I just didn't care for the mandatory structured curriculum. If I was interested in a subject, I'd get an A, and if I wasn't, I'd get an F. There was no middle ground. Hell, I was an exotic being from California. It gave me a more developed perspective than a lot of my friends. My high school years in New York were all about getting high and laid. I had pussy on my mind 24/7. The whole bros before hoes thing did not apply as far as I was concerned. I was the worst when it came to girls and my guy friends. I took a girlfriend from one of my friends, Frank, and made her my girlfriend. It was terrible, and I just didn't give a shit. It was almost this primitive territorial thing that I just wanted all the girls to myself. One of my best friends, Joe Curry, used to say, Aunt, you're a fucking weasel. I would see him talking to a girl across the room and go out of my way to start telling jokes and try to cockblock him. I wanted all the attention of every single girl in the room. I'm lucky. I had great friends who just didn't beat the shit out of me because I definitely deserved it. I ended up quitting high school. I know it's a little disappointing in retrospect. It's not like they have GED reunions. In 11th grade, the dean of my school called me in and said, There's no way you're going to pass this year, Kumia. Why not try taking the rest of this year off and see what it's like getting a job full-time? Then come back next year after you see what it's like in the real world. Maybe this will give you more drive. I was thinking, you're giving me permission not to come to school? I left my junior year and started working, washing dishes at Chicago Pizza and Pub. Chicago? I also worked at an electronics place called Deutsche Relays. It sucked working at these places, but I loved having money. When the weekends came around, I would still hang out with my friends from school, and I was the only one making it rain with the do-re-mi. Eventually, I did go back to school, but it didn't last very long. The dean's advice backfired because I started getting a taste of making money and resented not making any while I was back in school. So I ended up quitting my second attempt at 11th grade. Leaving school didn't stop me from educating myself on subjects that I wanted to learn about. I was fascinated by space travel, and astronomy. I would go to the library and find really terrific books and read them. I didn't need a teacher to tell me what and when I should be learning. That lasted a couple of years until my mom finally decided she had done her job and it was time for me to move out. She gave me a move-out date by instructing me to get my affairs together, and start looking for a place to live. I've had landlords more sensitive than my own mother. She really wanted me the fuck out. She was marking off the days on the calendar. I didn't do anything to properly prepare for this. I didn't have anywhere to go. I went to different friends' houses and crashed on their sofas. I had no ambition to do anything other than party and get by day to day. If someone gave me a couch to sleep on, I'd stay on that couch until the person told me to leave. In 1984, I stayed with my friend Dave Simonlewski and his family, which included his two brothers, sister, and mother, who was an invalid and partially paralyzed. Jesus Christ, why am I laughing? Mrs. C said I had to do stuff around the house to earn my keep. I was the houseboy, and I fucking loved it. Everyone would get up early for school and work, and it would be just me and Mrs. C left in the house. I would vacuum, dust, clean the dishes, shop for food, and keep her company watching General Hospital. She'd be in her Craftmatic adjustable bed, and I'd be in a chair next to her smoking cigarettes, hoping for the reunion of Luke and Laura. Hey, I'll admit it, I was always looking forward to the next episode. One time during the first couple of weeks I was staying there, I was sleeping on the couch and could hear Mrs. C hobbling towards me. She could kind of walk with a limp, though through one eye I saw her walk over to the fireplace and grab the fire poker. She walked straight at me with the poker, and I was thinking, what the fuck is she doing? And more important, how was I going to explain beating the shit out of a half-paralyzed woman who was my friend's mom? She stood over me with the fire poker in her hands with the point facing right at me. I thought, hey, if you want me to leave, just say so. You don't have to kill me. I decided that if I saw the poker start moving down, I was going to have to grab it and beat her head open with it. Mrs. C then just put the poker away and went back to bed. I was beyond creeped the fuck out. I woke up and went about my business that day, but during dinner that night with the family there, I said, I have to bring something up. Early this morning, I know I wasn't dreaming. I saw you, Mrs. C, come up to me and raise a fire poker right above my head like you were going to stab me with it. She started laughing hysterically to the point where I thought she was going to choke. Well, her son's room was directly above where I slept, and Mrs. C couldn't walk up the stairs. So apparently every morning while I was normally in a deep sleep, she would wake him up by banging the fire poker on the ceiling. She said some mornings she contemplated using the fire poker in my pants. Oh, Mrs. C. I stayed with them till they moved. I then got a place with Sean Similewski, who was the middle brother, and my I then got a place with Sean Similewski, who was the middle brother and my girlfriend at the time, Carrie. We rented the downstairs of a house in Green Lawn, Long Island. This was a fucking party house. We never paid rent even though the landlord was constantly trying to shake us down for it. My brother ended up staying there for a little while too and sold coke out of the house. We'd have people banging out at the door at all hours of the mornings with stereos, shit stolen from their relatives, and in a perfect world, cash to purchase blow from my brother. He didn't stay with us too long. Sean, Carrie, and I did live there for a good 4 years. This was the crash pads of crash pads. There was a pyramid of beer cans and dirty dishes stacked to the ceiling. It was a house that people came to hang out and get fucked up in. Carrie was technically my girlfriend, but we didn't have any real love connection. She was like one of the guys. She was there because she could put up with the shit guys do and say when they get together and drink. Then Sean moved out, and Carrie and I needed to find another place. We ended up moving right around the corner into Carrie's cousin's house. We lived there almost a year until I met Jennifer, who would eventually end up being the biggest mistake of my life. I mean, my wife. Jennifer was a bartender in Green Lawn. What were the chances of my falling for a girl who poured drinks professionally? As it turned out, pretty fucking good. Jennifer had a great body and was 23. She was everything you like about a girl before you're in a relationship with her. It was 1989 when we hooked up, and at this point, Carrie and I had zero chemistry sexually. She just wasn't into it. It seemed more like a chore for her. Jennifer could be considered sexually adventurous. The first time we had intercourse, I had to come home to Carrie, and I had the smells of passion all over me. Sweat, cum, vaginal juices, and spit, along with a spritz of disloyalty. I knew that if Carrie saw me, she would smell that I just had sex. I was driving a Baja Bug at the time, which was having engine problems. I decided to pour gasoline on myself and reach underneath the car to get oil and grit all over me to mask my infidelity. I got home and said, "Son of a bitch, this car broke down again. I finally got it started. Don't even get near me. I'm a mess." I was just going to jump in the shower and wash off the gas, oil, and vagina. It would take me many years to realize it was going to take a lot more than gas and oil to clean the stink off Jennifer's and my marriage. Chapter 6. My Shot. It was 1991 when Jennifer and I said, "I do." It was an unforgettable year because I also turned 30, which was the reason I got married in the first place. It felt like it was time I had to do something with my life. My mom was working in a bar in Comac, Long Island, about an hour outside of Manhattan. I knew all her customers, and when I went in there, they'd always go, "Hey, Ro, get your kid a drink." This was a common occurrence from the time I was of legal drinking age up until the time I hit the big 3-0. For some reason, when I hit 30, it dawned on me. When am I not going to be Ro's kid? I got to do something to be an adult. So I'll get married. Isn't that a great reason to get married? Because you feel like you're supposed to be a certain age, by a certain age? I just didn't want to be thought of as a kid. It was all in my head, and ironically, in hindsight, it never stopped. To this day, I still consider myself exactly as I was then. I've just accepted the fact that I'm in a constant state of arrested development. Fortunately, my occupational choices have allowed this. At that time, I was in construction. I never considered myself a construction worker who wanted to be in entertainment. I always thought I was an entertainer stuck in construction. The guys I worked with were nice enough, and I got along with them, but they were nothing like me. I knew I was different. I wasn't supposed to be doing this. Sure, it paid the bills, but I was miserable and did the least amount of work I could possibly do while still keeping my job. Oh, I was very creative at not working. I could bullshit with the best of them. This was back when everyone used beepers. My beeper went off and I'd have to call the boss and be like, "What? This is just a clusterfuck that you sent me to." Meanwhile, the job was already finished. There were times I got beeped when I was already driving home. The job would take 3 hours, and I would write it as if it were an 8-hour job. The rest of the day I'd be drinking at the bar or riding my jet ski on company time. But I was in a rut and knew I had to do something, anything to get out of it. During this time, I was constantly in bands with Joe. I was the frontman, the lead vocalist. I always wanted to make it as a musician, but I wasn't delusional. I knew how difficult it was to make any real money at it. I've seen it happen with other people, but within a year they were back working the same old jobs again. It's just the hardest thing to sustain. I never realistically thought to myself, "Hey, I'm going to be a rock star." I was just hoping in some way that this could lead me into something where I didn't have to wake up at 7:30 in the morning and swing a fucking hammer. I needed out of that. I would write song parodies all the time for my family and friends. My brother would bring his acoustic guitar, and my other friend would have a small drum kit. We'd go out to where my parents would hang out with all their friends at Watch Hill down on Fire Island. They'd all take their big boats out there, and we'd set out on the dock and play these song parodies, and they fucking loved them. The people on the dock, we didn't even know, were laughing their balls off. We'd cover anything that was in the news, like Amy Fisher and Joey Buttafuoco. We did a parody with the Pure Prairie League song Amy. "Amy, what you gonna do? Go out and buy a 22, put some lead in Mary Jo, and now you're through." And we did one about John Wayne Bobbitt to an old Bee Gees tune. "You don't know what it's like, baby, you don't know what it's like to lose your penis the way I lost mine." I think that's how it would go. At that point, my brother and I had been doing pretty well with the band thing. We weren't making a lot of money, but we're making a buzz around town. We both still did our day jobs to pay the bills, but we're also gigging regularly around New York. My brother was the real go-getter in this whole operation. I was a lazy fuck. Joe was the guy who motivated us to do shit. In 1994, when the OJ thing was all over the news, I wrote a parody about it with the song "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay," and it was gonna electric shock OJ. Sitting in Los Angeles jail, and that judge won't let me post my bail. Now this could be the end of me, 'cause California got the death penalty. Wait, I know this song. Sitting in Los Angeles jail, and that judge won't let me post my bail. Now this could be the end of me, 'cause California got the death penalty. They gonna electric shock OJ, cook my behind like a cherry flambe. Hey, they gonna electric shock OJ, toast my behind. Silly me, I thought he might even get the death penalty for killing 2 people. And I wrote this song before the verdict came out, but the response was tremendous, and it wasn't relevant. It was relevant and funny. So Joe sent the OJ parody out to several radio stations in Connecticut, New Jersey, Long Island, and New York. Stations started playing it, and people loved it. Opie played it and got in touch with us and said, "Guys, I love what you're doing here with this stuff. Come on my show and play it live. Would you do that?" I was like, "Fuck yeah." Greg, Opie Hughes, was the guy in Long Island radio. He was on the major rock station WBAB and did the Nighttime Attitude, a show from 7 p.m. to midnight. He was a big deal in that market. Everyone on Long Island knew him. He was a real disc jockey who was playing tunes that every Long Island douchebag in a Chevelle wanted to hear as they were drinking and speeding down the expressway. This was the summer of 1994. I was thinking, this is it. This is all I needed. I just needed one fucking break. I'm going to be on a real radio station because of something I did and wrote. I'm now getting my chance to shine. Finally, my brother and I were going to the studio to perform live. I would sing and Joe would accompany me on guitar. I had always said I just wanted a chance. Just let me in there, and if I suck, throw me the fuck out. I didn't want to go to the Columbia School of Broadcasting and learn how to wire a transmitter. You can't teach what works on the radio. So we went to WBAB and performed live. We hit it out of the park. Opie thought it was great. I loved it, but by the time the song was finished, I realized there was plenty of time left, and I wasn't just going to shut my fucking mouth. I decided to be one of those juggling, spinning plate guys who plays drums with their feet. I couldn't spit enough shit out onto the show that night. I did impressions. I talked about current events, and Opie was just like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" He was going back and forth with me, and we were having a great time. The show ended, and he said, "Holy shit, can you come back next week?" Of course I could come back next week. I'd be there whenever he wanted me to be. We continued doing that, and I would read the paper that day at work, and I'd go to Opie's show and just start riffing about the news and do impressions and whatever else I could do. I was just happy to be there. I just loved sitting behind that microphone and was just like, my God, I'm really doing radio now. This was exactly what I wanted to do. He started inviting me in 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, and he was recording all of these shows. All jocks record their shift for air checks, but he was sending the recordings out to stations all over the country. The morning show at WBAB, hosted by Bob Buchanan, who was also a huge name in rock radio on Long Island, started getting wind that Opie had this guy who was doing impressions. He started going into Opie's tape bin and pulling out stuff we had done the night before and started playing it on his show. Opie was getting pissed, but Bob was also the station's program director, so he couldn't really lay into him. Opie told me about this, but I had already known. I remember I was in the attic cutting a 9x9 vent in the ceiling listening to Buchanan on WBAB in the morning. Bam! There was me on the radio doing some impression of something newsworthy at the time. I was sweating. I had the shingle nails hitting me in the head. I was breathing in insulation, and I was hearing my voice on the radio and thinking, why am I on the radio and still here? I couldn't fathom it. I was on the radio. Shouldn't I be rich? So Opie told me, I think Bob is going to approach you to do his show. And soon enough, Bob did approach me to do his show. And I did a couple before Opie said, I'm not going to tell you what to do or anything. The shows didn't go very well. I had no chemistry with the guy. Bob didn't know how to segue into what I did. He'd be like, hey Anthony, look at this news story about Newt Gingrich and go. I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? When Opie said, he's going to approach you for the show full time, I said no. I knew I had a better shot with Opie, but I also knew I had to go to work. Opie's show was at night and Bob's was in the morning, when I had my real job that was paying the bills. During this time I was doing Opie's show, we started becoming friends. The first time he invited me over to his house was huge to me. What Howard Stern was to New York City, Opie was to the smaller market of Long Island. If you listened to Howard in the morning and lived on Long Island, you listened to Opie from 7 p.m. to midnight. It was just him playing rock and roll and in between songs getting in some funny shit. During that time, he had what was considered a wild show. He'd have girls come in or someone with a goat. It sounds innocent, but we're talking the early 90s when crazy radio was Stern. Opie was definitely doing his own thing and had built a nice fan base. So going to his house was no little thing for me. I was so naive about everything. I had my own little world, and that was all I knew. I considered myself very smart, but I was a high school dropout. I wasn't a stupid person, not by far. I knew a lot about astronomy, physics, and chemistry, but I didn't have the academic credentials to say, hey, I'd like a position with you here at IBM. What you got? I was self-taught about many things, but man, I was naive about life. Opie invited me over to his house, and I was conjuring all these horrible thoughts of traveling over there in my '86 Dodge Aries cake, breaking down rims of different colors with smoke pouring out of the car, thinking I was going to be pulling up to a gate with an intercom saying, I'm here to see Opie, with the gate opening to a mansion. I mean, hell, he was on the radio. My assumption was that anyone in any aspect of show business was rich. And that's what I honestly thought. For all the people I knew who listened to Opie, and the fact that he was popular, he had to be a millionaire. So he gave me his address, and it was in Northport, Long Island, which is a pretty nice fucking area. I pulled up at the address and was like, hey, these houses kind of look like shit. I didn't get it. They were just old Seatown Northport houses, broken down because the salt air had fucked with everything. I pulled up to his house and Opie was there waving to me. I was completely disillusioned and confused. In my head again, Mr. Naivety, I was like, this must be his summer home. I mean, the guy had his own radio show from 7 p.m. to midnight. Now, in hindsight, I know those guys can't pay their fucking rent doing 7 to midnight at a local station. I went in there and we watched the movie The Crow and talked about radio. He talked about how psyched he was about this whole thing. It wasn't even Opie and Anthony at this point, but he just loved what I was doing, loved what I was bringing to the show, and wanted to expand on it. He really thought we had a chance to go further than WBAB. I was just listening to this and my jaw hit the floor. I couldn't imagine this was the actual thing. We ended up going to a bar in Northport, and later we always thought of this as the Big Summit. We kind of carved out what we wanted to do as a radio team, which inevitably became the Opie and Anthony show. I took it with a grain of salt because I had no confidence in what I did. Why would I? I had never done it. I knew what I was to people like my friends, family, and anyone who would listen, but I never knew I had the ability to actually take it pro. I remember him saying, hey Anthony, I love what we're doing here. I want to take the recordings of what we're doing and start sending them out to various radio stations and get us a radio gig. Would you actually be able to leave what you're doing? Because the radio business is weird. You may have to move somewhere and do this. Of course, I said. Yes. Little did I know that he had already been sending out the recordings.